In this video, we're going to talk about primitives and their corresponding wrapper classes. So it's not specifically mentioned in the study guide this week, but I really want you to understand what they are so that when I write code, you can understand when I'm writing a primitive, when I'm writing a wrapper, and what the difference is, because we're going to be using them throughout this whole unit. Every week we'll be using primitives and wrappers. So far we've talked about three types of primitives: booleans, ints, and doubles. There are others. I'm not going to go into the difference in this particular video. We will talk about them in the coming weeks though. So you'd know that a boolean is true or false, an int is a whole number, and a double is a number with a decimal point. The others you can have a read about if you're interested. We'll cover those in a later video. But you'll notice with the primitives, they all start with a lowercase letter. So when we declare a primitive, always lowercase. And what that does is it creates, it reserves some memory for us to store some data. So a boolean, it would reserve some memory for us to store a true or false value. An int, it would reserve a space in memory for us to store a whole number. A double, it would reserve a space in memory for us to store a number with a decimal point. And those variables, depending upon where we declare them, if we declare them as an instance variable, they will last for as long as the object does. If we declare them in a method, they will last while the method is running. And we've talked about that, that's scope. We talked about that, I think, in topic 2. So every primitive has what's called a corresponding wrapper class. And what a wrapper class does is it actually wraps the primitive in a class to create an object. And there's a distinct difference that we'll get to in a minute. So when we declare a wrapper, we actually have two spaces in memory. We have the first space in memory, which we call a pointer, and that points to the second space in memory where we store the object. And that's true of all objects, not just wrapper classes. So you can see the corresponding wrapper classes start with an uppercase letter, with the exception of integer. Integer, we use the whole word integer as opposed to int. So you can see we're going to declare those differently, and we'll look at that in a minute. But because they're an object, they have methods associated with them. As you would know, classes have methods. Because these are objects, they have methods associated with them. And that can make them very useful. And we'll be looking at methods associated with the wrapper classes also in coming videos. So a primitive is just a space in memory. A wrapper is an actual object that has methods associated with them. The other main difference is the default value. When I declare a primitive, its default value for a boolean is false. Its default value for an int is 0. Its default value for a double is 0.0. When I declare a wrapper, because they are objects, their default value is null, and it's null until we assign it a value.